The soft melody of the violin filled the air as I walked down the aisle, my ivory gown cascading behind me. All eyes were fixated on me, judging, assessing, whispering under their breaths about the woman marrying the widower and becoming a stepmother at 38. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding as I neared Wesley at the altar. He looked breathtakingly handsome in his tailored tuxedo, his warm brown eyes glistening with unshed tears of joy. A tender smile stretched across his face, and in that moment, I knew I was making the right choice. My gaze drifted to his daughter Elise, standing beside him as the maid of honor. Elise's frigid eyes bore into me, her lips curled in a disconcerting smirk. An icy shiver ran down my spine, but I forced myself to maintain my composure. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and I wouldn't let anyone ruin it. Not even Wesley's spiteful 16-year-old daughter. The ceremony was beautiful, filled with heartfelt vows and joyous tears, but when it came time for the toasts, the mood shifted. To the new couple, Elise began, raising her champagne flute with a sickly sweet smile. May their union be blessed. Her pointed gaze flickered to me, her voice dripping with disdain. We all know how challenging it can be to start over, to have a complete stranger invited into your family's most intimate circle. The tension in the room thickened as Elise's razor-sharp words cut through the air. I squeezed Wesley's hand, silently pleading for his support. But I trust my father's judgment, Elise continued, her tone softening with false sincerity. And I vow to embrace Lorraine as one of our own, even if she can never replace the woman who birthed me. The room fell eerily silent as Elise's backhanded toast sank in. I felt the blood drain from my face, a cold sweat prickling my skin. How could she be so cruel on my wedding day? Wesley shifted uncomfortably beside me, but he didn't challenge Elise's behavior. The hurt and humiliation pierced my heart like 1,000 needles. As the reception carried on, I plastered on a fake smile, laughing and chatting with guests, while my mind spun with doubts. Had I misjudged the situation? Was I naive to think Elise would ever accept me into their lives? When Wesley and I danced our first dance as husband and wife, I clung to him desperately, my cheek pressed against his chest as bitter tears stung my eyes. "Don't let her get to you," Wesley whispered, stroking my hair. "She's just acting out because of the big changes. She'll come around." I nodded numbly, searching his warm, assuring eyes for any glimmer of uncertainty. But Wesley's confidence was unwavering, a blind paternal love that bordered on delusion when it came to his daughter's cruelty. In that moment, I knew my battle had only just begun. In the weeks following the wedding, I tried my hardest to build a relationship with Elise. I complimented her accomplishments, shared an interest in her hobbies, and made every effort to be warm and approachable. But Elise remained cold and aloof, her icy glares and backhanded comments chipping away at my resolve. "That top is cute," she said one day as I prepared dinner. "But don't you think it's a little young for you?" I bit my tongue to keep from snapping back, my cheeks flushing with humiliation. "Thank you for the input, Elise. I'll consider your perspective." Wesley shot her a disapproving look from across the kitchen. "Don't be rude to your stepmother." Elise shrugged nonchalantly. "I'm just being honest, Dad. We don't want Lorraine to become the neighborhood joke." "That's enough," Wesley warned, his voice stern. But as the tension lingered between us, I could see the doubt and guilt clouding his eyes. A few days later, I caught Elise in the act of her manipulation. She had crept into the guest bedroom, where I dressed to find my purse lying open. A sly grin crossed her lips as she slipped something inside, but her face turned to horror when she realized I was watching. "What did you just put in my bag?" I demanded, my heart pounding with fury. Elise feigned an innocent look. "Nothing. I was just looking for a hair tie." "Don't lie to me." I crossed the room and snatched the bag from her hands, reaching inside to retrieve a crumpled $20 bill. "Were you trying to plant this to frame me as a thief?" No, I swear, I was just borrowing it to buy new shoes this weekend," she claimed, her voice trembling with badly acted tears. "I didn't mean anything by it." "Girls, what's going on?" Wesley rushed in, his panicked gaze jumping between us. Before I could explain, Elise burst into theatrical sobs. "Lorraine attacked me. She's accusing me of being a criminal in my own house." "What? No, that's not what happened at all." I protested, my head spinning as I realized Elise had already spun the scenario to suit her victim narrative. Wesley pulled his daughter into a protective embrace, shooting me a look of utter betrayal. How could you do this to my little girl, after everything I've sacrificed to make you feel welcome here? My mouth gaped in disbelief as I watched father and daughter huddled together, their bond fortified by Elise's crocodile tears and my assumed role as the vindictive stepmother. I knew that any attempt to regain Wesley's trust would only feed into Elise's martyr act. Resisting the urge to scream, I turned on my heel and stormed out of the house, desperate for a reprieve from the escalating mind games. As I sat alone in my car, the weight of Elise's methodical manipulation crushed me. How could I get through to Wesley when he was utterly blinded by his daughter's lies? Every effort to expose her wicked behavior only reinstated his belief that I was the villain tormenting his innocent princess. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, sobbing in frustration. That's when the harsh reality crystallized. If I wanted to save my marriage and my sanity, I would need to play Elise at her own insidious game. And I would have to fight fire with fire. In the following weeks, Elise's vindictive scheming intensified. And this time, she took aim at my career. It started with an anonymous email to my boss, filled with vile insults and pornographic memes that were shockingly perverted, all sent from my own work email account. At first, I assumed it was a horrible prank until I received a stern warning from HR about inappropriate conduct. "Do you have any idea how this makes the company look?" My boss chastised me in his office. "This is the kind of lewd garbage that gets people fired for sexual harassment." "I swear I had nothing to do with those emails," I pleaded desperately. "Someone must have hacked into my account as a sick joke." He raised an unconvinced eyebrow. "Or maybe you're just bad at covering your tracks after a drunken lapse in judgment. Either way, I have to take action." With those words, I was suspended from my job without pay, pending an official investigation into the incident. I left the office in stunned disbelief, frantically racking my brain to think of anyone who could be sabotaging me in such a twisted way. The answer hit me like a slap across the face: Elise. Only someone so depraved and hell-bent on destroying me could plant such disgusting allegations. I burst through the front door in a heated fury. "You conniving little monster!" Elise looked up from her homework with a look of mock surprise. "Whoa, hey, what's going on?" "Don't play dumb with me," I snarled, advancing on her. "I know you sent those vile emails from my work account." Elise's expression morphed into one of overacted fear. "What? No, I would never do something like that." "Yes, you did," I shouted, feeling my tenuous grip on control rapidly slipping. "You're trying to sabotage my career because you're a miserable, evil little—" "Lorraine!" Wesley's voice made me whirl around. He was staring at me in abject horror, as if I were a complete stranger. "Have you lost your mind?" I opened my mouth to defend myself, but the dam had already burst. Elise dissolved into exaggerated sobs, running to her father's arms. "She came at me screaming all these awful things," she cried, burying her face in his chest. "I've never been so scared in my whole life." Wesley held her protectively, shooting me a look of pure loathing. "How dare you terrorize my child like this, after everything I've done to accept you into our lives?" The sickening feeling of defeat washed over me as I realized, once again, I had played right into Elise's manipulative trap. She had baited me to blow my top, conveniently leaving out the part where she sabotaged my job. Wesley would never listen to my side. His daughter's tear-stained face was all the proof he needed of my supposed cruelty. "Get out," he said through gritted teeth, hugging Elise tighter. "I can't have someone like you in this house, threatening my family." My heart shattered into a million pieces as the man I loved exiled me from his home and life without a shred of hesitation, all due to the Machiavellian workings of his precious daughter. As I gathered my belongings amid a blur of tears, I knew I had two choices: either surrender to Elise's vicious victory, or take my own drastic measures to expose her depravity, no matter the cost. Revenge had officially consumed me. After being unceremoniously kicked out, I spent a few agonizing weeks crashing on my best friend Nina's couch. The humiliation and rage ate away at me as I replayed the events over and over, tormented by how easily Elise had destroyed my life. "That evil little psychopath has to pay for what she's done," I vented to Nina one night over glasses of wine. She's caused so much misery, turned my own husband against me with her mind games. Nina gave me a sympathetic look. I'm so sorry, Lorraine. What Wesley allows his daughter to get away with is unacceptable. Have you tried reasoning with him again? I let out a sardonic laugh. And give Elise more ammunition to paint me as the hysterical, unhinged wife? She's got him so tightly wrapped around her finger he's blind to her manipulation. Well, you can't just give up on your marriage because of her, Nina insisted. Wesley is a good man who obviously loves you. You need to make him see the truth about his monster spawn. Her words lit a new fire of determination inside me. She was right. I couldn't simply slink away in defeat. If I wanted to reclaim my life, I would need to hit Elise where it hurt and break her iron grip over Wesley once and for all. A few days later, I finally reconnected with Wesley at a quiet cafe, my heart pounding nervously as I waited for him to arrive. When he walked through the door, I immediately noticed the shadows under his eyes and the weariness etched in his face. Elise's reign of terror was taking its toll. I'm glad you finally agreed to meet with me, I began carefully. I know a lot has happened, but... Lorraine, just stop, Wesley cut me off, holding up an exhausted hand. I can't keep going around in these circles with you and Elise. He paused, seeming to brace himself before continuing in a strained voice. She's my daughter, my family, and after the horrific way you've treated her, I have to put her safety first. My mouth fell open as the implication of his words sank in. Wait, are you saying you want a divorce? A pained look crossed his features, but he gave a resigned nod. I'm sorry, Lorraine, but this situation is untenable. As long as you're insistent on making Elise's life miserable, I can't allow you in our home. White-hot anger surged through me at the audacity of his words. Are you kidding me right now? Your demon seed has shown nothing but cruelty and contempt toward me since day one. Several patrons turned to stare at my outburst, but I didn't care. This was my last-ditch effort to save my marriage. She sabotaged my job, got me fired on bogus sexual harassment claims. I cried, my voice cracking with desperation. She's a master manipulator who has twisted your mind into thinking I'm the enemy. To my horror, Wesley shook his head firmly. I don't want to hear any more of these wild accusations against my little girl. She's been through too much already, losing her mother like she did. He rose from his chair, stone-faced. It's over, Lorraine. If you keep choosing this delusional path of vengeance against my daughter, then you're choosing to lose me too. The world seemed to stop spinning as he turned and walked away, his ultimatum hanging like a guillotine blade over my neck. I was suddenly faced with an impossible choice: surrender to Elise's cruelty and walk away from my marriage, or take the fight to another level and wage psychological warfare against a child. As the former option filled me with cold dread, I realized my path forward was clear. If Wesley refused to listen to reason and protect me from his daughter's abuse, then may heaven help Elise when I took off the velvet gloves. I would stop at nothing to survive her onslaught and make her pay, no matter how far I had to go. After Wesley's devastating ultimatum, I found myself utterly alone, a prisoner of Elise's twisted games with no allies in sight. Even Nina, as supportive as she tried to be, couldn't fully comprehend the psychological warfare I was enduring. You have to walk away, Lorraine, she pleaded one night over the phone. This situation is toxic and destroying you from the inside out. I can't just give up, I insisted, pacing the floor of my tiny apartment. I refuse to let that miserable brat take over my life like this. Though a big part of me knew Nina was right, the mere thought of surrendering to Elise made me sick to my stomach. There had to be a way, any way, to break through to Wesley. My mind raced for a solution until a glimmer of an idea sparked. If I could obtain hard evidence of Elise's manipulation and depravity, I could blow her schemes wide open and force Wesley to finally see the truth. But first, I needed to get close to them again. A few days later, I showed up unannounced at their doorstep with a plate of cinnamon rolls, Wesley's favorite. He opened the door looking confused and slightly disheveled. Lorraine, what are you doing here? I made a peace offering, I said carefully, extending the pastries with a warm smile. I've had some time to clear my head, and I want to try to make this work. For us. Skepticism flickered across his weary features, but before he could protest, Elise appeared beside him. "What's going on?" she asked, eyeing the treats with obvious disdain. "Your stepmother came over to apologize," Wesley replied, still seeming uncertain himself. A tense silence stretched between us until Elise finally shrugged. "Well, I guess that's a start, but it'll take a lot more than burnt pastries to make up for the trauma she inflicted." I wanted nothing more than to lunge at her and smack that simpering smirk from her face, but I simply nodded meekly. "Of course, you're absolutely right, Elise. I have a long way to go to earn back your trust." Wesley's expression softened ever so slightly, and I could sense his defenses lowering a degree. Hook, line, and sinker. Over the next few weeks, I played the role of the contrite, regretful wife to perfection. I doted on Wesley, paying him compliments and being overly solicitous. With Elise, I walked on eggshells, bending over backwards to appease her every demand while massaging her ravenous ego. "Wow, you look so pretty in that dress," I gushed one day as she descended the staircase in an expensive new frock. She arched an eyebrow at me. "Finally, a sincere statement from you." Then her gaze drifted downward in a slow assessment of my appearance. "That top is nice for someone of your vintage." I bit back the seething remark on my tongue and simply smiled. "Why, thank you, Elise." Little by little, I could feel Wesley's icy barrier starting to thaw. He engaged me in more frequent conversations and even patted my hand affectionately when we were alone. Progress was agonizingly slow, but I savored every molecule of ground I reclaimed. Because like a lioness silently stalking her prey, I was waiting for the perfect moment to pounce with irrefutable proof of Elise's depravity. Once I obtained that golden ticket, her world of terror tactics would come crashing down around her. Wesley would be forced to see his little princess for the demonic monster she truly was. And then, finally, we could confront the bitter truth that had poisoned our family all along. No matter how much Elise's twisted revenge against me had already cost, I would make her bear the full consequences of her actions, even if it meant destroying my husband's relationship with his daughter forever. For weeks, I played the role of the apologetic, reformed wife in hopes of lulling Elise into a false sense of security. All the while, I bided my time looking for any crack in her facade, any sliver of evidence that could obliterate her twisted lies once and for all. That critical break finally came from an unlikely source, Wesley's estranged brother, Derek. I hadn't seen Derek since the wedding when he was visibly uncomfortable with Elise's vicious toast. At the time, I chalked it up to typical family tensions, but when he reached out asking to meet in private, I leapt at the opportunity. We met up at a quiet diner across town, and as soon as Derek slid into the booth, I could see the torment etched across his world-weary face. "I know what you've been going through with my niece," he began in a low, conspiratorial tone. "Hell, I've had a front-row seat to Elise's manipulative mind games for years." My eyes widened as he reached into his jacket and retrieved a bulging manila envelope. "These are just some of the things I've collected on that devious little monster over the years." Derek slid the envelope across the table, and as I examined the documents inside, icy tendrils of dread gripped my heart. Police reports, psychological evaluations, even testimonies from past teachers, all painting a damning portrait of Elise's psychopathic behavior. Faked suicide attempts, false assault allegations, destroying personal property. "You name it, she's done it," Derek said grimly, "and always playing the innocent victim to keep her daddy wrapped around her finger." The more I read, the more infuriated I became at how systematically Elise had tormented those around her, ruining countless lives with her Machiavellian games of deceit. But most disturbing of all were the documents linking her to Wesley and Derek's estrangement over a decade ago. Apparently, after their mother's death, Elise had deliberately set a fire that nearly killed Derek out of sheer spite toward him. Wesley had chosen to believe his precious daughter's crocodile tears over the blatant evidence, leading to a violent falling out that severed all family ties. "I've tried warning Wesley over and over, but that miserable brat has him so twisted that he can't see the truth," Derek said, his eyes brimming with a combination of sorrow and rage. "He has to pay for what he's put our family through by enabling that sociopath." My mind reeled, torn between feelings of nauseating validation that I wasn't crazy or alone in my suffering, and escalating fury toward Elise for the sheer depth of her depravity. The stakes were far higher than I'd ever imagined. Right then and there, I knew I had to take drastic action to stop Elise's reign of terror over our lives. She wouldn't rest until she had utterly destroyed me and anyone who dared challenge her twisted need for control. A cold sense of determination settled in my gut. No more playing Elise's sickening mind games, no more cowering in fear of that malignant child's wrath. From that moment on, I would use Derek's stockpile of evidence to wage scorched earth psychological warfare against the devil's spawn and obliterate her credibility in Wesley's eyes once and for all. I would pay her back tenfold for every ounce of torment she had inflicted on me. Even if it meant fracturing Wesley's family permanently, I would stop at nothing to dismantle Elise's mastery of delusion and make her face the brutal consequences she deserved. The mendacious monster would finally be vanquished. I looked up at Derek with flinty resolve burning in my eyes. Show me everything you have on that spiteful little beast. It's time we burned her twisted kingdom to the ground. Armed with Derek's trove of damning evidence against Elise, I spent weeks carefully assembling the perfect plan to obliterate her facade of innocence once and for all. I would need to catch her in an indisputable lie, one so egregious that even Wesley couldn't rationalize away with his blind paternal instincts. My moment arrived when Elise mentioned having a casual get-together with friends at the house while Wesley worked late one evening. I sensed an opportunity. "Oh, I'm sure the girls would love it if I made some of my famous double chocolate brownies," I offered cheerfully. Elise's nose wrinkled in poorly disguised disgust. "Yeah, I'll pass. I'd hate for you to accidentally poison my friends." Rather than take offense, I matched her icy glare with an eerie calm. "Don't worry, Elise. I would never dream of doing anything to harm you or your friends." She seemed caught off guard by my placid response, her brow furrowing slightly as I held her gaze in an intense stare-down. After an uncomfortable moment, she rolled her eyes and stomped off to get ready. Later that evening, I put my plan into motion. I baked an extra tray of brownies, carefully slicing off a piece from the end. Then I extracted a small dosage of ipecac syrup, an emetic drug that quickly induces vomiting and nausea even in tiny amounts. Working meticulously, I injected a few drops of the syrup into the gooey center of one brownie square before seamlessly reattaching the end piece. With a steady hand, I reassembled the tray to make it appear completely untouched. I placed the tainted brownies on the kitchen counter just before Elise's friends arrived. Right on cue, they immediately swarmed the treats like locusts. "Ooh, these look amazing," one girl gushed, stuffing an entire square into her mouth. I watched with bated breath as one by one, the teens devoured the rich chocolate desserts, except for Elise, who defiantly avoided a single bite. 20 minutes passed in tense silence. Suddenly, the first girl's face went pale as a ghost. She clamped a hand over her mouth and bolted toward the nearest bathroom. A chorus of violent retching soon followed as each girl became violently ill. "What's going on out here?" Wesley shouted, running into the chaos with Elise close behind. My heart pounded as I fixed Elise with a pointed stare. "You were right, Elise. It seems I may have accidentally poisoned your friends after all." For a fraction of a second, her icy demeanor faltered with a glimmer of shock and fear. She quickly recovered, her face contorting into an Oscar-worthy mask of devastated innocence. "You did this?" she cried, tears spilling down her reddened cheeks. "What kind of deranged person would intentionally make my friends sick like that?" Wesley held his daughter protectively as the rest of the girls were rushed to the bathroom by their horrified parents. "Elise, go upstairs and get away from that monster." With Elise safely tucked away, Wesley turned toward me with a look of sickened disbelief. "I want you out of my house," he growled, his voice shaking with unbridled rage. "You make me absolutely sick." I stood motionless, allowing the tableau of righteous fury and indignation to fully unfurl. Only when Wesley had exhausted his climactic outburst did I slowly reach into my pocket and retrieve the tiny vial of ipecac. "This is what I slipped into one of those brownies," I said evenly, displaying the clear liquid in its tiny glass prison. "It's a medical syrup designed to induce vomiting as a fail-safe for poisoning or overdoses." The blood drained from Wesley's face as the realization crept in, framed again by his sociopathic daughter's treachery. You see, I knew Elise would never let an opportunity at portraying me as the villain pass her by, I continued, my voice hardening like steel. So I gave her exactly what her twisted mind demanded to justify her hatred for me. Before Wesley could respond, the sound of sirens pierced the air outside. Derek had followed through on calling the police as I had instructed, giving me the perfect window to unleash the killing blow. Go see for yourself the revolting truth I've discovered about your precious Elise, I said, gesturing to the manila envelope lying in the next room. Every horrific criminal act, every shred of evidence that she's a dangerous, manipulative psychopath who will never stop terrorizing us. Utter bewilderment contorted Wesley's ashen features, but I pressed on with a startling finality. It's her, or me. You have to make a choice, to either save your deranged daughter by enabling her sickness, or save yourself and do what's right. The war had been waged, the stakes raised higher than I'd ever dreamed. As the police stormed in to untangle the grotesque web of lies, I awaited Wesley's judgment with a strange sense of calm liberation. No matter his choice, I had ensured Elise's reign of terror had finally reached its demise. In the aftermath of exposing Elise's cruel manipulation tactics, our household plunged into chaos. The police swarmed the house, questioning everyone, while EMTs checked on Elise's friends who had consumed the tainted brownies. Through it all, Wesley remained eerily silent, his face hollow and haunted as he rifled through the damning evidence I had provided against his own daughter. With each fresh atrocity he uncovered, I could see him aging years before my eyes, the fragile perception of his family crumbling into ashes. Elise, of course, denied all wrongdoing. She put on her usual theatrics of feigning utter shock and innocence. But as the police carted her away in handcuffs on charges of criminal harassment and reckless endangerment, her mask of virtue finally shattered. "You're both going to pay for this," she shrieked, her face twisted into a monstrous sneer as she fought against her restraints. "I'll make you miserable. You hear me? You're going to regret the day you—" Her foul-mouthed tirade was abruptly cut off as the police forced her into the back of the squad car. An eerie silence fell over the scene, the first time in months I could breathe without Elise's oppressive miasma of terror strangling me. I turned to find Wesley staring at me with a desolate, empty expression. For several moments, he seemed unable to find any words as his world continued imploding around him. "How could I have been so blind?" he finally choked out in a guttural rasp. All this time, she was... I cautiously reached out and placed a hand on his trembling arm. "You were blinded by a father's unconditional love. Elise is a master manipulator. She took advantage of that at every turn." Wesley slowly shook his head, agony etching lines across his pale features. "That's no excuse. I enabled this sickness inside her for years because I was too cowardly to see the truth." Before I could offer any words of comfort, his hollow gaze bored into me with an intensity that made me flinch. "You did what you had to in order to protect yourself," he said, a bitter edge creeping into his tone, "even if it means I may never be able to truly forgive you for tearing my family apart like this." A knot twisted in my chest at the implication of his words. I had known dismantling Elise's toxic reign would forever rupture the fragile ecosystem of their home. But hearing Wesley voice it aloud solidified that grim reality into a harsh sentence. I understand," I managed in a tight whisper. "I just hope one day you'll see that I did this out of love and desperation, not cruelty." For a long moment, Wesley's jaw clenched, like he was biting back a torrent of emotions threatening to burst free. Finally, with a shuddering exhale, he pulled me into a fierce embrace, clutching me with a desperation that belied his internal fracture. "Thank you," he rasped in my ear, his voice cracking with anguish, "for having the courage to make me face the most horrific truth of all, that I failed as a parent in the most profound way imaginable." In that moment, all my anger and thirst for vengeance against Elise dissipated. My heart ached for the man clinging to me, his entire world having been vaporized by his child's depravity. A part of me wondered if I had gone too far, if there was any redemption or healing to be found in the ashes of this tragedy. But as painful as this reckoning was for Wesley, I knew we had to confront the rot at the center of our family if we ever hoped to rebuild, even if that meant living forever in the shadow of Elise's malice. With police sirens wailing in the distance, I tightened my embrace and promised Wesley the only shred of solace I could offer. We'll get through this, one step at a time, and we'll make sure Elise can never hurt us again. After all, the worst possible downfall had been narrowly averted. Now all that remained was to cautiously chart a new path forward, no matter how bleak and haunted by past traumas. At long last we had shed the shackles of my tormentor's reign. Enduring the aftermath would prove the ultimate test of our perseverance.